So let's talk about collecting a new army of the Knights of Sigismund and getting a force of Black Templars on the tabletop. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Black Templars, and in this video I thought I'd do a general overview of collecting the faction, a bunch of ideas and options for starting the army, and how to expand from there. Let's start out with some of the reasons that you might want to collect the faction, move on to things to think about when planning out a force, talk about potential first purchases, and a focus on the units in their range, and some ideas for expanding an army. There's loads to talk about, so let's jump straight in. Black Templars are a pretty cool Space Marine chapter within Warhammer 40k. Essentially a successor chapter of the Imperial Fist, following in the footsteps of Sigismund, the first captain of their legion, though compared with the Defenders of Terror themselves, they tread really quite a different path. Out of an army of crusading, zealous, knightly Space Marines that are very divergent from the Codex Astartes teachings, and also operate very differently from the rest of the Astartes chapters on a more logistical level, being a fleet-based chapter with crusades constantly roaming the galaxy, resupplying and recruiting from the worlds that they pass by, before charging their Crusader fleet headlong into the worlds held by traitors or Xenos, purging all before them and restoring the realm of the Imperium to the Emperor's light. Compared with other Space Marine chapters, they perhaps take the theme of being zealous Puritans to the next level, having a hatred of Psychers and love for Flamers, and uncompromising and merciless to any elements they feel have fallen from the Emperor's grace. Their theming and styling is very much of crusading knights, fighting in their black power armour with white tabards and loincloths, and when they take to the fight they're perhaps best known for their on-foot infantry, with a great number of these zealous chaplains within their ranks, belling out litanies to the Emperor, or they lead large horde-style squads of Space Marine Crusader squads and Sword Brethren elites from the chapter, often delivered to the midst of the fight by a Land Raider Crusader. Miniatures-wise, the Black Templars of course have access to the big Space Marine range, the biggest and most frequently updated army out there in Warhammer 40k. So loads of options and plenty of choices to fill just about any battlefield role. Most people will be largely focused on their core range though. The Black Templars did get really quite a recent, well-received and good range refresh in mid-2021. Updated versions of their Sword Brethren and Crusader squads, plus all their characters they were best known for. They've got a nice upgrade sprue and a few more generic characters released after that. Their unique range isn't absolutely enormous, but easily feels good enough to add a whole bunch of flavour to the army. Going through their models and their two primary infantry kits are the Sword Brethren and Crusader squad, the Sword Brethren being the elite veterans of the chapter with all manner of fancy power weapons, and the Crusader squad being the fighting troops. Black Templars have the lore of having an initiate paired with a neophyte for training, so have their interesting mixed squads with power armour and scout armour within the same force, and often fight in big units with perhaps unusual numbers of Space Marines deployed in one place, at least compared with other chapters. For their named characters, there's High Marshal Helbrecht himself, an indomitable duelist and a big name in 40k. He's got a pretty cool diorama model as well, sheathing his sword in a slain orc. There's Chaplain Grimaldus, the hero of Hell's Reach, with his fun relic bearer servitors. The Emperor's Champion, one member of the chapter taking the role before the battle and bearing the black sword. In a recent vote he got voted as the single favourite miniature for the faction by you guys. Their equivalents of captains and lieutenants with the Marshal and Castellan, the Castellan resembling some old artwork from the 3rd edition rulebook. They've got a Black Templar upgrade sprue on the right, which I think is more interesting than the majority of the chapter-specific ones. It's got some physical renditions of their relics, a multi-melter for vehicles, and some shotguns for the neophytes. And their more recent releases for 10th edition have been this Crusade Ancient and the Execrator Chaplain, a banner bearer and a frontline battle chaplain for the chapter. There's plenty of options out there on the 3D printing market as well. Lots of creators out there that have made things that can add a sort of Space Knightly sort of theme to your power armoured models, particularly handy for maybe some of the more generic Primaris ones. The Eternal Pilgrims of Greytide Studio are one. I'll leave them links down in the video description. They have options for their STLs and options for physical bits printed on demand. I do particularly like their Dreadnought upgrades, such as this guy with the great big sword. Otherwise though, they can use all the standard things that Space Marines have, lots and lots of stuff out of the Primaris range. Perhaps the vehicles that you can use with their bolt-on multi-melters are particularly of interest, things like the Impulsor and Repulsor chassis. They're well known for their Land Raider Crusaders of course, and Black Templars make good use of Dreadnoughts as well. I feel like Redemptor Dreadnoughts are a fairly popular one for Templar collectors. Price-wise, Space Marines in general tend to be kind of cheaper than most for most of Warhammer 40k. Space Marine armies don't tend to need loads of models given that they're quite elite, and given their big focus with lots of releases, they often tend to have lots of discount deals going. Both the Black Templars' two unique kits aren't terrible for the points for the money value. I feel like both their previous and their new Combat Patrol box sets are both decent deals for units that you'd want in an army as a new collector. I'll talk about them a bit more later though. Gameplay wise, for putting them on the tabletop, their current rules are in Codex Space Marines and then the Codex supplement for Black Templars. They generally tend to play with big hitting melee might, infantry on foot supported by heroes, Sword Brethren basically hitting hard into just about anything in melee, and Crusader squads in particular blending infantry, and they can be very intimidating on mid-board objectives with the ability to surge into battle. If you shoot them, you're unlikely to be able to wipe them out in one volley. Templar Vows is their main mechanic that replaces Oath of Moment that the majority of the Divergent chapters get. It's particularly handy for a +1 to wound for anything that's somewhat tough in melee. A really strong boost that makes you feel good about taking lots of melee units with kind of light attacks. They're far better into things like monsters and vehicles than most chapters are. And then as well as the core Codex Space Marine attachments, they've got 4 unique ones as well, each themed around different aspects of the army. I feel like all of them at least have some interest. I'm kind of wondering whether or not they're going to beat out things like Gladius and Stormlance for the Templars though, which both give some pretty good supports to melee units. Power-wise, it's kind of early days after Codex release. Initially I'd say they're looking solidly playable, though I'll be certainly interested to see how they perform in tournaments. Either way though, I really wouldn't dwell too much on current army power and 40k. By the time that you've collected an army and got some games in, I'm sure things will have probably changed around a bit. Games Workshop tends to keep the updates coming. I certainly wouldn't choose to collect an army due to current in-game power, as what's good changes frequently. In any case though, if you want to collect an army of crusading zealous space knights, purging their way across the galaxy and putting the enemy to the chainsword and power sword, the Black Templars might be the army for you. Before we move on with planning and expanding a Black Templar force, I'll just go a quick shout out to Tabletop Stronghold, today's video sponsor. One option to get your crusade from A to B in safety. And they're basically some purpose-built magnetic carry cases made for wargames and Warhammer in particular, all made by Sam based in West Virginia in the USA. Magnetic storage tends to be a very popular way to transport models these days, the idea being that you put magnets in the bases of your miniatures and then you can line them all up on a magnetic surface so they don't rattle around while in transport, and you can also fit loads of them in a very tight space without the need for foam. Tabletop Stronghold's take on this are the mag cases, made out of notably sturdy MDF, so very hard to break or damage when they're put together. And then in the box there's different levels in which the steel shells can slot in, depending on the height of the miniatures that you want to transport. On the front of the box goes a clear acrylic sheet so you can see what's where and display your handiwork while it's in transit. And broadly speaking, the vast majority of the reviews that I've seen about these things tend to be pretty good. Most feedback I've seen in Reddit and down in the YouTube comments tends to be pretty positive. They're really quite sturdy and practical to use, maybe a little bit heavier than some options, though I certainly wouldn't say prohibitively so. They also have a competitive terrain set as well, made of MDF that comes at a discount if you order any cases through them. In any case, if you'd like to check them out, I'll leave them links down in the video description. They have the code AT25 for 25% off sales, so be sure to use that if you pick anything up from them. I'll cycle back to their individual cases at the end of the video. Getting back to Nightly Space Marines though, if you do choose to collect a Black Templars army, there are a few things that you could look into and plan before getting miniatures on the tabletop. For understanding of their rules and a fair bit of their background, you could look at Codex Space Marines and the Black Templar supplement for it. That has all the unit profiles and the rules from Games Workshop, plus things like rules for their combat patrol, Crusader narrative gaming for the army, plus a bunch of lore and miniature showcases. Otherwise though, other places do host Warhammer rules. New Recruits and Warhapedia both have a fair amount of info, and if you do have the codexes and the codes available, then there's the Warhammer app as well. You could try before you buy, potentially using Tabletop Simulator or proxying models to try a faction out and see how you like the feel of it on the tabletop. There's all manner of stuff that you could take a look at for social media. Here on YouTube I've made a Black Templar Codex review video, and I'll certainly be aiming to do a few more videos such as a unit tier list and a roundup of army lists in the not too distant future, so subscribe or stay tuned if you'd like to see that. There's massive other stuff out there on the internet though, all manner of battle reports, painting guides and lore in abundance on other channels. Just search Black Templars and a good amount will come up. If you want a Black Templar specific YouTube channel, you could check out Implausible Nature. They tend to keep a bunch of unit focuses and reviews coming for the Knights of Sigismund. Otherwise, following along with Black Templar related places on social media isn't the worst idea. Most major 40k factions have Discord servers, Facebook groups and subreddits dedicated to them, and it can just be a way that you can get an idea of what people are thinking about the faction and what they're talking about, as well as being a place to ask some basic questions if you're new to the faction or Warhammer in general. In the planning phase, you could put an army list rosters together as well, maybe a rough 1,000 point or 2,000 point army list as to what you'd first like to wind up with, maybe using New Recruit or the Warhammer 40k app. With Space Marines and Black Templars, you can either collect a balanced army or maybe go to a bit more of a theme. The vast majority of people tend to go for more balanced collections, having a well-rounded force that is themed around some of the faction's most iconic units and the ones that might appeal to you personally, either from their look or feel or how you like them on the tabletop. I guess for Black Templars, you could decide on the balance of unique units versus more generic Space Marine ones. Some people might go very, very heavy on the unique stuff, other people might have more of a mix. You can balance range versus melee. It might be tempting to go fairly all in on the melee for the Black Templars, but they're certainly still tactically aware Space Marines that make use of all the tools of war when they need to. Or otherwise, you could just double down and go for a big theme list, maybe going for a Horde-style Black Templar army, maybe a Black Tide-style one with a huge amount of Crusader bodies. At 2,000 points, you could put 100 plus Space Marines on the board, which definitely has an appeal, so that would be a big slog and hobby effort to get them looking tabletop ready. You could go for a transport-heavy theme, maybe making use of Land Raider Crusaders or Repulsors with their multi-melters on. I've seen a few Black Templar players quite enjoying doing mass dreadnoughts as well, maybe with a bunch of nicely converted Redemptor or Brutalis chassis dreadnoughts. The Codex does have some clear theme with their detachments, and it means that you could just choose one of those detachments and build around it, say having a few ancient models for the detachment that uses lots of them, or going heavy on the chaplains for the litany focused ones. Outside of the Space Marine roster in general, you could still add in allied knights or allied agents if you'd like. Maybe a puritanical inquisitor to back them up, and I feel like an allied questing knight really fits the theme of the Crusade style army in general. Another thing to think about when getting an army together is planning out a paint scheme. And one of the earlier things to do when collecting a force is to paint up a test model. Likely a Crusader Squad Marine would be what I'd go for. They could maybe go for a Standard Intercessor or an Infernus Marine if they happen to be more accessible for whatever reason. Infernus Marines do tend to be in fairly ready supply in 10th edition. There's absolutely tons of good painting guides here on YouTube that you could follow along for one with. Maybe going for a speed paint style one to get battle ready Marines on the board as fast as possible, or going next level, either doing some awesome blends and things, maybe from one of the many talented YouTube painting content creators, or going with Games Workshop's own sort of heavy metal style with a heavy emphasis on the hard edge highlighting. Black Power armor maybe isn't the single hardest thing to paint in the entire world, though it can be a bit of a slog with a lot of highlighting that maybe doesn't look super poppy compared with certain other armies out there. And particularly with some white elements on models, they can take a bit of time depending on how you choose to undercoat the mini. The majority of people tend to stick with their black and white colour scheme, though you absolutely could do a different one if you wanted to. It's a big galaxy and there's lots of Space Marine chapters out there. You could certainly have other ones fighting under the same sort of mantle and the teachings of Sigismund. Another thing to think about could be how you're doing the chapter heraldry. The unique miniatures have really quite a lot of themed bits on them. For the chapter icons for other ones, you could go with either freehanding in those Maltese crosses, or maybe using transfers from the Black Templar kits that you get. You could use the shoulder pads from the upgrade sprue, and as mentioned, there's plenty of 3D printing creators out there, including Greytide Studio. I've seen lots of people that make just generic Maltese crosses that you can put on shoulder pads though. Planning aside though, let's talk about some miniatures. And for starting Black Templars at the moment, I'd likely either start with a Black Templars Combat Patrol or a Crusader Squad if you want to enter the army at a lower price point, and dip your toe in painting some miniatures for the army before jumping in with a big box. There's plenty of other good Space Marine discount sets out there as well, such as the starter sets for Combat Patrol Space Marines, and there's going to be a whole bunch of generic Space Marine Combat Patrols releasing in the not too distant future, themed around other chapters that are perfectly usable for the Templars. For a starting point for an army though, I feel like the current Combat Patrol Black Templars is a really quite good one. In the box set you get the Emperor's Champion, so one of the most fun and central miniatures of the army, one Crusader squad of 10, one Sword Brethren squad of 5, and then 3 Blade Guard veterans. The discount versus buying the kit separately is around about 25% off, and it gets you around about 450 points on the board at time of recording, which I feel like is a fairly acceptable amount for a Combat Patrol box set. There's certainly plenty that are far less than that. I think the unit choices are broadly very good ones. You're going to want both the Crusaders and Sword Brethren in good numbers for Black Templars. The Emperor's Champion is one of their coolest characters and really quite a fun miniature, and the Blade Guard Veterans were recently voted as the single most enjoyed Space Marine miniature out of the generic range. They fit in well enough with the theme, even if they maybe have a bit of an overlap in battlefield role with the Sword Brethren. The box set has a whole bunch of spare weapons as well, so quite a good bits box for kit bashing other characters. The Sword Brethren box set can be quite a good source for that in particular. I feel like it is the sort of box that you could get multiple of. You just have to do something with the extra Emperor's Champion. You can only field one of those in game, but given the sheer amount of bits that you get with the other kits, you could very easily kit bash it into say another Marshal or Castellan or something. I feel like I've seen a lot of conversions online that use the miniature as a base. Overall quite a nice box set I think. Lots of units that are both going to be strong on the board, work well with the Templar vows and their +1 to wound, and all very nice looking miniatures all around I think. Before we talk through the rest of the range, I'll just mention buying 40k miniatures in general and the options to do so. Direct from Games Workshop's own Warhammer web store is generally the most reliable, but also tends to be the most expensive way to do things. If you're new to Warhammer, then generally I tend to go through the local gaming stores that tend to have discounts versus Games Workshop. Games Workshop have lots of official discount retailers that sell their same things between 10 and 20% off depending on where they are around the world. For a few examples of those, I've got plenty of channel affiliate ones linked down in the video description. Element Games for 15% off within the UK, Gap Games for 21% off in Australia, Fenris Workshop for 10% off in Canada, Wargame Portal for 15% off in the USA, and Taschengeldieb for between 16 and 20% off in Germany in the EU. There'll be links down in the video description, and a big thank you to anyone buying things through them when they do order some Warhammer in. It does help to support Auspex Tactics and the videos I make. New plastic Games Workshop kits certainly aren't the only option though. Second-hand Warhammer can be a really big value saver, and Space Marines tend to be a really popular faction, so you have a good turnover of their kits there. eBay could be worth a look, or local groups of people getting in and out of armies. Obviously quality can be variable, but it can save you a fair amount of money, and potentially a good amount of time if they're assembled well and painted to a serviceable standard. Finally, bear in mind that 3D printing and third-party manufacturers are a thing as well. Plenty of alternative power armoured sculpts out there, and certainly great for getting extra themed weapons or aesthetic upgrades. Again, I'm maybe more familiar with Greytide Studio and their internal Pilgrims range as a good one for some nightly upgrades for power armour. They'll be linked in the video description. There's absolutely loads of others though, just give it a Google. Buying Warhammer things aside, let's talk about a few of their specific units from a more gaming and expanding point of view, with a look at some of their core units and Space Marine discount sets. The Sword Brethren are the elite melee of the army, some of their best close combat, and pretty consistently so. There's some good damage combos that they can have in their codex, also wounding on a 5+ with a marshal for example. Assembly wise, I'd take their fancy pistols. The hammer and claws are usable enough, though maybe a bit more take and leave than they used to be. As mentioned, it's a great kit for spare bits or kit bashing characters. I've certainly seen other chapters make use of getting a set of these and then using a bunch of other bits in their bits box to make a bunch of characters and captains and lieutenants from. In game they can be fielded as 4s, 5s, 9s or 10s. Again, an extra wound compared with both Space Marines, and the standard weapons are the mastercrafted power swords, 3 attacks hitting on 2s at strength 5, AP 2 and damage 2, or with lethal hits. It's a really nice generalist profile, and particularly with Templar vows giving them a +1 to wound against anything that's toughness 5 or higher. Hard to go wrong with, though it could be tempting to get a transport to keep them from getting shot up as they get into battle. I quite enjoy detachments where they can advance and charge as well. For the battle line unit, and perhaps one of the mainstays of the army, we've got the Crusader squads. Again, Sword Brethren and Crusader squads probably best to get from the combat patrol. For assembly for these guys, I'd typically be tempted to go as many chainswords as possible, and then upgrade the ones that are allowed to with some power fists as the special option, and use them as a very melee focused unit as opposed to a mixed range one. In game they're really quite cheap Space Marines, points for the models, get a whole flurry of chainsword attacks with sustained hits 1, and again will really enjoy the +1 to wound vow. They have OC2, so they've got a bunch of weight on objectives, and their special rule is a pretty intimidating one called Righteous Zeal. When they're shot, they can surge d6 +2 inches forward, and potentially engage the enemy in melee when they do that. So it means that the opponent can't really even afford to approach them into the midboard to contest their objectives, unless they can either afford to take these guys head on in close combat, or aren't planning to shoot them. They might quite enjoy a fighty character to lead them. A lieutenant might not be the worst idea with some lethal hits to additionally help them against tougher things, though most of the Black Templar characters are really quite viable. Aside from core units, I'll just mention a few more of the Space Marine style discount sets. Combat Patrol Space Marines is a great way to get a bunch of very cheap Space Marines on the board in 10th edition. Don't buy it as the actual Combat Patrol box set though, get the Warhammer 40k starter set box though, as it's literally the exact same models plus free Tyranids, and charged at a lower price overall. If you can find a Tyranid collector to split the box set with you, then these are some of the cheapest Space Marines for the points that you can get on the board. As a Templar player though, you might not necessarily want to get that additional librarian like a lot of people tend to buy in to field the Combat Patrol, given the Templars' abhorrence of Psychers and not being allowed to field them in the same army. Miniatures are monopose, but really quite nice sculpts, maybe not super effective in game or anything like that, but some really fun cool models to build up a force. Otherwise, for Space Marine discount deals, there's a bunch of Combat Patrols on the near horizon. The Salamanders one is out at time of recording, but I'm sure the rest won't be too far behind. Perhaps a particular interest for the Black Templars could be the Imperial Fists one. Again, that's got a bunch of pretty cool, fairly recent miniatures, and quite well received looks-wise. Could be another option to bulk out a force, and maybe the other most directly helpful one might be the Raven Guard one, if you do want some Phobos and jump elements in your army. As an alternative for some scouting elements for the force, there's also the Vanguard Task Force box set as well. This one comes with monopose infiltrators, eliminators and suppressors plus a lieutenant, and again is an okay points cost for the amount of money that you pay for it. The box set comes from Games Workshop Online. The Dark Angels Combat Patrol could be another option to look at if you find this particular mix of units appealing. Could be a way to bulk out a unit of Blade Guards to 6 and then have some Hellblasters, some generic intercessors and a Gravis Captain thrown in. The Gravis Captain feels like a bit of an oddball maybe, though it's not too bad in Gladius right now if you give him the Armor Indomitus. While briefly talking about the Unforgiven as well. Another option that gets nicked from time to time by the Black Templars are the Deathwing Knights. They've got really quite cool knightly Terminator models with some big chunky shields. Obviously they do have the Deathwing and Dark Angels iconography, though if you wanted a hobby project you could potentially do some converting and put some big Maltese crosses and some other Templar trappings on the models, maybe fielded with maces as all very knightly assault terminators. Finally, for discount sets, you might find the previous Combat Patrol Black Templars out and about. It's no longer on sale from Games Workshop anymore, as it was replaced by the new one just talked about, but still a good entry point for an army if you do find it in some local discount retailers, provided you can actually find it at the price that it was going before it went out of production. This one has a Black Templar Marshal, a 10-strong Crusader squad, 5 Intercessors, an Impulsor, and the Black Templar upgrade sprue. Again, all of them pretty reasonable choices and designed for the Black Templars. Having some Intercessors around for sticky objectives isn't the worst idea, and the Impulsor again has maybe some excess value for the Black Templars, going well with a multi-melter bolted on top of it for 5 points extra, and being a quite nice battlefield taxi to get Sword Brethren or maybe Blade Guard into battle. Otherwise, expansion-wise for their unique stuff, Helbrex is still a bit of a beast in close combat, hard to go too far wrong with him and the sheer amount of damage he can put out. Grimaldus feels a little bit more take or leave than he used to be, not dropping in points as much as he might have hoped for and losing quite a good feel no pain style buff. He could still be making one chunky Crusader squad on the mid board though with toughness 5. Castellans now allow you to reroll hit rolls if you pass a leadership test, and they could combo rather well with the Marshal if you wanted. He can give you critical hits on a 5+. Between the two of them you could have a Sword Brethren squad with lethal hits on a 5+, and then the Castellan allowing you to reroll everything but a 5+. That would mean that you'd be auto-wounding with a spectacular amount of mastercrafted power weapon attacks, and both of those chip in with lots of those too. The Emperor's Champion is a nice lone operative and a powerhouse melee unit. Lone operatives have lots of value in 40k just in general, and being able to deal huge damage while he does so definitely isn't the worst thing in the world. I might be tempted to have him lurk just very slightly behind the lines, do utility lone operative things, and then commit to the fight when he's in range of a unit that he thinks he'll be able to deal some horrendous damage to. The Black Templars get their own datasheet for their famed Land Raider Crusader, the version of the big armoured Space Marine transport tank that they're well known for using in the lore. Its damage output isn't really quite as threatening as the other variants of it, though the Templar version at least gets an interesting special rule. After it's shot something, the models that jumped out of it get to reroll ones to hit and wound against that same target, which is a pretty solid and meaningful damage buff, and could give you an extra big damage punch for a melee combo jumping out of this one. Certainly makes it way more tempting and doesn't cost any more points. For the new characters, I feel like the Crusade Ancient is a bit on the niche side outside of his detachment where they're kind of pushed. Fights on Death on a 4+ certainly isn't bad and can help counter melee armies, but maybe isn't quite so reliably useful as a big fighting melee buff character like a Marshal perhaps. The Execrator Chaplain grants advance and charge. He doesn't add intrinsic melee damage buffs to his unit outside of any enhancements he might bear, but being able to advance and charge is a really big bonus for the Templar detachments that don't have it as a stratagem. It's not going to be one to want to take quite so much in Gladius or Stormlance though. Finally, for unique datasheets with Templar fire support, the tanks that get the bolt-on multi-melters now get them completely for free, I think as a compensation for not having access to Oath and Moment. In particular, these 3 pictured can be great though. The Impulsor good for transporting Sword Brethren plus some extra fire. Their Repulsor Executioner gets a different datasheet rule, allowing you some big rerolls to hit against things near Black Templars. That's absolutely awesome for the amount of firepower plus a multi-melter that it has. And the Gladiator Lancer's an already very threatening tank that really doesn't need Oath of Moment with big rerolls. It's already solidly efficient for standard Space Marines, and getting a multi-melter tacked on top of that for no extra cost is great. These ones would probably be my first port of call for adding fire support to an army. Otherwise, if wanting to get a functional Space Marine army on the battlefield right now, strong lists often tend to make use of small numbers of a bunch of different units, as the Space Marines just have lots of different squads that sell themselves via their special rules and have great value for one copy of them but maybe diminishing returns on lots. It's handy to have an infiltrate squad in just about any 40k list, screening back the enemy and doing early objectives, and scouts are great with that, having the scout rule as well and return to reserve. Jump Intercessors can be cheap deep strikers to do secondaries and also hit the enemy hard with chainswords as well. Templar Vows will make them more dangerous. Intercessors can get sticky objectives, often taking just one squad of 5 to get that rule in the army, and then they have some nice anti-horde fire support as well. Even if you're going mainly in melee, having something to crack tanks at long range, like those gun tanks just mentioned, can be good. The Combi Weapon Lieutenant is pretty good if you've got a good grasp of the 40k movement rules. He can be hard to get to grips with, and have some nice nuisance and screening used on the front line, good for grunt work and secondaries. And Infiltrators could be another tempting option, denying some deep strike and maybe an alternative for Intercessors for guarding the home field. Otherwise, for more generic Space Marine units, I'd also give a shout out to the Hellblasters as well. Exciting Space Marines with big plasma guns are generally quite popular, and they're one of the choices in the codex that's pretty good points per dollar. So for the amount of money that you spend on the kit, you get really quite a lot of points on the board. They are maybe a little bit suboptimal for Black Templars though, not having access to Oath of Moment to amp up their firepower, maybe a bit less draw compared with other places out there, but I still think they're quite fun models and can allow you to expand the points of a force rapidly. Terminator squads can do that as well quite well, again not exactly considered super strong, but maybe a bit more on theme and make use of the melee buffs. Generally with expanding an army in Warhammer 40k, there's always loads of scope for just collecting what you like the look and feel of. 40k rules change over time, along with balance updates. At time of recording, the vast majority of units in their roster are fairly usable. If you're collecting Black Templars specifically, I would certainly skew towards their unique units. They are more likely to get more attention and have Games Workshop try and make them relevant when they're not played so much. And then on top of that, add supporting elements that interest you or you think will be useful. Unless you're experienced with Warhammer, I'd probably not go out and buy an entire 2,000 point army list all in one go, maybe more like enough to get some early games in. And once you've got a significant amount of those models painted up, maybe expand in small jumps beyond that, getting a unit or two, having it painted up, and then moving on to the next as appeals. For playing the forces on the board, as mentioned, you'll need the Black Templar rules, so that's their Codex supplement alongside Core Codex Space Marines. They each have a Codex code that allow you to put that into Games Workshop's Warhammer 40k app, and that can be an official way to reference the rules digitally as well. They'll give you the core rules for the faction, though Warhammer tends to have a bit of a hybrid digital rule set at the moment, and you can find the rest of the rules and expansions for the army on the Warhammer community website in the 40k download section. One of the most relevant documents is the Minotaur and Field Manual. That one gives you updated points for the army. The Codex ones tend to be a placeholder. The Codex will have an errata document to correct any printing errors and small changes they might want to make. If Games Workshop make rules balance changes to the Templars at a later date, then those will appear in the balanced data slate document. As it's early days though, at time of recording they don't have anything there. Out of their 4 detachments, one of them is a digital download one. That one's called the Wrathful Procession in the Grotmus detachment section and does have some fun theming. Might be a little bit more of note now that the Righteous Crusaders one got removed. And finally there's Legends documents in the download section too. Lots of things for out of production Space Marine units that are no longer recommended for mainline 40k. Plus I guess Games Workshop might well have rules for the Firstborn Crusader squad turn up there. That's not 100% confirmed yet and certainly hasn't happened yet though. As mentioned for referencing rules, other third-party sites host them as well, particularly Warhapedia being a notable one, and New Recruit having a bunch of unit profiles. For the core rule of the army, rather than having Oath of Moment like the majority of Space Marine chapters, they swap that out for Templar Vows. The idea of these being that you basically have 4 different options to choose at the start of the game, though for some reason Games Workshop decided to make one of them basically pretty amazing, and the rest all rather mediocre. I feel like in the vast majority of more normal Warhammer 40k games, Black Templar players would be tempted to go for accept any challenge no matter the odds. That one gives you a +1 to wound with melee attacks if the defender's toughness characteristic is equal or higher than your strength, so a pretty excellent damage boost in particular to their more core units. Things like the Crusader squads and the Sword Brethren will love that. I'd see that one as easily the default, and then generally only go for one of the others if in the given matchup that you're playing that one's not going to be useful. Say maybe if you're playing against entirely Eldari aspect warriors and you're already wounded everything on a 3, you could think about one of the rest like the sticky objectives, anti-psycho, or the fallback and charge. Otherwise, in a Black Templar army, there's a few other restrictions, maybe the most notable ones being that you can't take the doubled up datasheets of things that they have unique versions of in their codex, plus you can't take psychers. They have a few rewritten datasheets for the ones that either get their multi-melters or get different special rules due to the Codex Space Marine ones revolving around Oath of Moment that the Templars don't have. For their detachment, in the Codex they've got the Vindication Task Force, which is themed around reclaiming and purifying the galaxy, with some rules for Ancients in particular, the Godhammer Assault Force, which has a transport focus, and the Companions of Vermint, which have a bit more of a melee assault chapter theme, with a focus on Chaplains and Judases. The Wrathful Procession, the Grotmus one, gives them the choice of a few different vows at the start of a turn, the +2 move, +1 strength, or the 5+ invulnerable, and actually in the absence of Righteous Crusaders is looking like one of the more general purpose ones. Though I still wonder whether Gladius with its advance and charge things might be tempting for delivering damage combos into melee. Certainly feels like there's different options to play them though. All the detachments add something of interest. For an idea for a starter army though, I've just gone with one themed list that should have at least some interest in most of the detachments. The idea with this one being to start with the Combat Patrol box set and go from there. It'll be roughly 2,000 points but not exact. The core of this one is one great big Primaris Crusader squad, with a Lieutenant and High Marshal Helbretz leading it. That one's definitely a great big all-in investment, but should hopefully mean that it can just dominate one objective, and the surge move that they have will be seriously scary when you could be getting Helbrett's profile and a massive amount of lethal hits +1 to wound chainswords into melee. Then for some elites of the army, we've got 2 sets of Sword Brethren with mastercrafted power weapons and 1 set of 6 Blade Guard led by a Judas here. They should all be able to take down some tougher targets, and the Sword Brethren each have a Marshal with them for some lethal hits on a 5+, and to get those into battle, 2 squads will take 2 Impulsors, and 1 will take a Land Raider Crusader to deliver them into close combat at really quite a long range, with some rerolls built in. Then there's an Emperor's Champion that's going it solo as a lone operative, being able to do utility things and then jump on an enemy unit when needed. A Repulsor Executioner with its big inbuilt rerolls to be an enormous threat that should threaten to off one enemy tank or transport whenever needed, and then a little bit of small unit Space Marine support, 1 squad of scouts with combat knives and a missile launcher, and 1 set of intercessors with a power fist and grenade launcher. They can provide some sticky objectives and mark the home field while the rest of the army goes off crusading. Hopefully that should be an overall balanced and intimidating list with a fair amount of threat and at least some units to do objective style things. Balancing some theme and unique units with a bit of gameplay, and probably would do well enough for multiple detachments, could be alright in Gladius or Wrathful Procession. It's got a fair few transports, there's maybe slightly lacking in Chaplains or Ancients for the other 2. In any case, I'll leave that there for now. Let me know your thoughts as to collecting Black Templars down in the comments below. Look forward to any other insights from Templar Generals at the moment. If you'd like something else Templar related to watch, I'll leave my Codex Black Templar review linked down in the video description if you'd like to check that out. Finally, before I go though, I'll just cycle back to the video sponsor in Tabletop Stronghold. As mentioned earlier, they're one option for some easy to store and transport magnetic carry cases, all made by Sam based in West Virginia in the USA. The carry cases have these trays inside them made of steel. Here's roughly how many miniatures that you can fit on one, around about 90 odd 25mm bases or 6 knight armigers when fully loaded. And then they basically have a bunch of different options with cases of different heights, the mini one being £72 or $75 with the code. That price includes shipping, they might have some VAT or sales tax on top of it. Even the small one does have a fair amount of room in it though, as you can see enough room for some Spartans and Sicarans on the bottom floor and a bunch of Terminators on the top. For their more mainline offering, they've got the standard mag case. This one's really quite a tall one, as you can tell by the Chaos Knights on the ground floor there. This one's around £114 or $120 with the code. I'll leave the dimensions of it on the screen, and they all come with a supply of magnets to mount to bases as well. Then they've got the really big one in the Mag Case XL, should be enough storage for some entire collections there. This one's mounting its acrylic sheet on the front, and there are some options for taking more or less of the steel trays as well, which could save a bit of money. Finally, as mentioned, they do have a competitive MDF terrain set offering as well, so if you were in the market for this one, it could be one option to get your hands on it a bit cheaper. If you buy any mag case, there's a discount on this compared with buying it separately. In any case, a big thank you to them for sponsoring the video though. I'll leave them linked down in the video description if you'd like to check them out. That's the end of this one though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. And if you'd like to support Auspex Tactics, then the channel does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to contribute and help keep these videos coming. Channel patrons get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.